Hello everyone, I'm Bill Hammond and I actually paid to see this. Today marks 1 year to the day since I started this little YouTube channel as a supplement to my blog, actuallypaid.com. And when I started the channel, I asked myself, is this going to be worth the time, effort, or energy to do it? The answer, honestly, is yes, because I'm still doing it. But really, it's because I'm just having fun, and it's not like I've sunk any money into this, nor will I probably ever make money off of it. But that said, I will admit I was absolutely floored by the response that my latest video making fun of the Minions trailers has gotten, where, as I'm recording this, it's well over 3,500 views, and it's gotten more likes than every other video I've done put together. So, thank you, seriously, from the bottom of my heart. Never thought it would even have that kind of a response. You know, the 12 to 20 views that each video get is probably all I ever really anticipated. So, you know, even if you've only watched for a few seconds and then clicked onto something else, you clearly didn't hate it enough to leave a hurtful comment or downvote it out of existence and screw with YouTube's algorithm. So, seriously, to everyone who's watched it, whether you loved it or hated it, thank you. Now, since today is the 1 year anniversary of the channel, I thought it'd be nice for a little bit of a celebration to kind of go back to the video that first started this whole thing, which was ranking the Pixar movies to that point a year ago. Well, we've got more movies now, and maybe it's time to revisit things a little bit. So if you watched that original video from a year ago, this looks really familiar. In fact, I probably even look familiar because the only difference, from my opinion, right now is that I shaved and I'm not wearing headphones. I'm even wearing the same shirt that I wore last year. The only difference on the list here is that I'm using a different tier maker template, so some of the poster images are different, but everything's the same. So, before we add our new entries, let's go quickly over where things stand from a year ago. These are the rankings. The D tier: Cars 2, Monsters University, The Good Dinosaur, Finding Dory, and Luca. All of those are either just really bad movies, derivative ripoffs of better movies. They just did not do much for me. And in the case of Luca, fine, you had one good scene with outing Luca's friend, which is a metaphor for the LGBTQ community, and that's an important moment, but it's also outdone by Saint Cheese and the Nick Park Aardman-esque character designs with these really shivery teeth smiles that are like, you know, Winter Wallace and Gromit showing up. The C tier, good to mediocre movies that don't exactly give you that much to look at. And in the case of the two Cars movies, Cars 1 and Cars 3, clearly just designed to sell toys, which is counterintuitive to the Pixar model. So that's where we get Cars, Bugs Life, Cars 3, Brave. The B tier, Toy Story 4. Good movie, but honestly shouldn't exist, and it kind of drags down the legacy of the series by having it. Onward, solid, middle-of-the-road type of adventure movie, and a nice repurposing of MCU actors, since Disney basically owns everything now. Finding Nemo, heartfelt, wonderful adventure. I just don't care for Dory all that much. Toy Story 2, worthy successor to the original, and Coco is honestly quite possibly the most dazzling place setting that we've ever had for a Pixar movie. Then the A tier, you have the instant classic of Monsters, Inc., the absolutely soul-crushing, but in the best way possible, first 10 minutes of Up. Incredibles 2 gets up here because of the Jack Raccoon fight. Ratatouille has another crystallizing moment with Peter O'Toole's food critic tasting the title meal and being transported back to his childhood. And then, of course, you have the absolutely brilliant physical comedy and animation direction from Brad Bird. Soul asks some great existential questions, but it also lets jaywalkers off the hook, so it doesn't quite get to the pantheon. And then you have Toy Story, the film that started it all. Then the S tier, The Incredibles. arguably the best superhero movie that's ever existed, and I will still contend that the MCU does not exist without it. Toy Story 3 would have been the absolute perfect capper for the series. It's been undone, but it's still a wonderful, gut-wrenching film. Inside Out, my favorite film of the 2010s altogether, and to this day, every time I watch it, I see something new with the exploration of emotion and character. And even the world inside Riley said is probably the most imaginative world we've ever been to in a Pixar movie. And then WALL-E from 2008, which should have been the first animated film to win Best Picture. It's damn near perfect. I really can't praise it enough. So, a year later, should we change any of these rankings? I mean, I said when I first recorded the video that, it was my feeling of as of that day. So, what should we change, if anything? My first thought was to move Toy Story into the S tier. And there's a reason why I won't, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but I think it is pretty much perfect right where it is, at the top of the A's. It set the bar, it set the standard, it's been exceeded, and it's been oft imitated. So, I think it really needs to be right where it is, and again, I'll go into a little bit more detail later as to why I'm not moving it. I also thought about moving up past Incredibles 2 to put it alongside Ratatouille, because both films are highly contingent on one specific scene to truly just go for the emotional gusto. It's just that on the whole, Ratatouille is a more complete story than Up is. Up is much more defined by those opening 10 minutes than Ratatouille is in its closing 10. So, again, leave them where they are. But there are two changes I want to make. Two changes. In the B tier, I'm going to move Toy Story 4 up ahead of Onward. And that's because while I still believe that Toy Story 4 shouldn't be, it is. It shouldn't exist, but it does. So taking it for what it is, since we have to deal with it, I do find myself gaining more and more affection for it, especially in the terms of Gabby Gabby's tragedy, the comic effect of Keanu Reeves and Key and Peele. And while Toy Story 3 was a send-off for the whole series, I do like the idea that Toy Story 4 is a send-off mostly for Woody specifically. The only thing I don't buy, honestly, at this point is that he would not take Bullseye with him, because, come on, it's Bullseye, you gotta. So, yes, it's got problems, and Forky doesn't work for me as well as he should. And again, it does degrade the ending of Toy Story 3 to even exist, but for what it is, I do think it is better than Onward. And then down in the C tier, in the original video, I said that A Bug's Life would either be at the top of the C's or the bottom of the B's when all was said and done, and then I forgot that an hour and a half later when I finished the video. Sorry it was so long. So let's correct that right now. I am going to move A Bug's Life up to the top of the C's. I haven't rewatched it recently, but among all the other films in the C tier, including Brave, I find myself being much more able to remember distinct moments from A Bug's Life than I do anything else. Like, from Brave, I remember the stupid answering machine from The Witch. I remember the little brothers being Hellions, and of course the bear stuff. But from Bug's Life, I remember the circus, the assembly line basically carrying the food. I remember the mechanical bird. I remember Hopper. I remember so much more stuff. So even though it is kind of the black sheep of the Pixar canon, because they were still figuring out what they wanted to do when it came out, 20 plus years later, it still leaves more an impression with me than Brave does 10 years later. So a mild adjustment, but not really that big a deal. So with that in mind, now we can get to the new entries. First, we have Turning Red. I was a little apprehensive because the trailer highlighted some moments that I don't think were that good. In fact, with both of these films, I included the trailers in the monthly "This Film Is Not Yet Watchable" column because they're just bad trailers. And it wasn't meant to say that the movies were going to be bad themselves, but they did not sell the movies on their best moments, basically. And it was curious to me that the movie was relegated to Disney Plus with its theatrical release almost entirely pulled when that was no longer needed in the wake of the COVID pandemic. Like, I get that Soul coming out in 2020, you had to do it. I kind of even get Luca to a certain extent because while theaters were reopened at the time, people were still hesitant to go back. You really didn't have a model at the time. I get it. But Turning Red comes out 2 years after the pandemic. All the theaters are reopened. There are very few restrictions. You clearly have faith in the project that it was going to, be successful. So I don't know why it wasn't released unless somehow it was bad. Turns out it's not bad. It's quite good, actually. I love the dynamic between Mei Mei and her mother, and then the mothers and aunts above her, because it does kind of show this intergenerational degree of understanding and misunderstanding, and this desire to do right by your kids, but knowing they're going to go on their own path. It's an evolution, I think, of the themes shown in Brave, just with a bit more room to breathe. The design on the panda is absolutely fantastic. And while Mei Mei and her friends are obnoxious at times, they do behave in ways that are believable for kids their age. Essentially, I only have two problems with the film. And this is not to say it's bad, it's just this is why it doesn't get into the pantheon. One, again, we somehow continued this Aardman-esque facial design with these rubber characters that just are just off-putting to me. Like, it makes sense with Nick Park's creation because they're claymation. On CGI, it just doesn't work. Second is the boy band bullshit. Look, like what you like. If you're into boy bands, if you grew up with the Backstreet Boys or New Kids on the Block, if you're a K-pop stan now, power to you. I'm not here to judge. What I am here to say is that the idea that Mei Mei would risk her life, her parents' life, her friend's life, and even the entire world, potentially, to go see a boy band concert is asinine. Whatever you may think of them from an entertainment factor, boy bands were created for marketing purposes. Their entire purpose is to sap money from gullible teenagers and their parents. They're not musicians, they're not artists. Sorry. That's just a fact. And it's okay to like silly, stupid things. I grew up watching the Ninja Turtles. I have a crush on Anna Kendrick and hope that one day she'll get really confused and think Bill Hader is me. But here's what you do with those fantasies and those obsessions. You muse on them. You think about them for 5 minutes. You play a little scenario out in your head, and then you get on with your life. You do not risk life and limb for this nonsense. So, with that in mind, Turning Red goes into the B tier. It's just a question of where. So, is it better than Coco? I would say no. Is it better than Toy Story 2? No. Is it better than Finding Nemo? On another day, I might say yes. Maybe when I revisit this again next year, who knows? It depends on whether or not I think Mei Mei is more or less obnoxious than Dory on a given day. But for now, I think I'm going to put this right here, just above Toy Story 4 and onward. Because if nothing else, Turning Red is a very unique and eye-popping way to explore well-worn themes, whereas Toy Story 4 is the third sequel. This is well-worn ground, and Onward is, again, a simple story told in a fun way, but we've also done those hardcore fantasy nerd elements before, even within Pixar. So, from an originality standpoint, I think Turning Red ranks above those two. And then we come to Lightyear. I really like Lightyear. It's a fun adventure. There's really good visuals. I gave it a B- overall, and I gave Turning Red a B, though we're not really talking about my individual reviews. We're considering the context of the overall Pixar canon. But I had one major problem with Lightyear, which will explain why it goes where it does and why something like Toy Story does not go into the S tier. For some ungodly reason, the studio decided they just had to tie this back in to Toy Story. And they did that via some really insipid opening text that posits somehow that this movie was Andy's favorite movie, and that's why he got a Buzz Lightyear action figure. This is stupid. It is just freaking stupid. Here's why. First of all, the movie comes out allegedly in 1995, the same year that Toy Story came out. Look at the visuals in Lightyear and look at the visuals in Toy Story. It couldn't have existed. This is the core problem with something like the Star Wars prequels, where you watch Phantom Menace some 20 plus years after A New Hope and wonder how the technology could be that vastly superior to its own future. It immediately pulls you out of the movie. Similarly, I am 100% behind Alicia's character. She's a strong commanding officer. She has great instincts and character development, and I love the fact that she has a wife and a child and then grandchildren to then become part of Buzz's story years later. All I'm saying is that movie does not exist in 1995. Please show me anywhere a film that came out in 1995 that would have been approved by the MPAA with a G or a PG rating to be shown to children that featured a lesbian married couple. It didn't exist. It's wrong that it didn't exist. Let me be absolutely clear on that. I want more diverse family units shown in film. But it didn't happen in 1995. I'm sure those family units existed, but they existed sadly in secret and in hiding and with no legal status. There's no way a film would have been put forward with that message for kids back then. I would have loved it if that was the case, but let's just be realistic. And then you have other things like, if Andy watched this movie, do you honestly think he would have only wanted a Buzz Lightyear instead of, say, the whole cast, or at minimum the cat, the wisecracking robotic cat? Come on. You just don't know kids if you think he wouldn't have wanted that. That's just silly. And then, of course, the film decides to go out of its way to just retcon other things that have been established in the Toy Story universe, like Zurg being Buzz's father as like a Star Wars joke. Now, spoiler alert, Buzz is Zurg. Well, that's just silly. It's like, why can't you just go back and watch the movies you've done and say, hey, we've established this, let's not contradict it. This is the major problem with prequels in general. It's that what they think is giving us a reference is actually undoing stuff that they've established. They think that these kind of winks and nods and tie-ins enhances the overall experience, but what it actually does is degrade the legacy of everything that came before it. That's why something like Toy Story, I can't move it into the S tier now, because it's now indirectly responsible for Lightyear. And the thing is, you didn't need to do this. You could have just had a Space Rangers movie. Just have a normal space opera that has no relation to Buzz Lightyear whatsoever, or maybe he has a cameo at the end. That's fine. Or if you really, really, really have to involve Andy in some way, go forward rather than backward. Give us a scene at the end of the movie with Andy walking out of the theater, now in his 30s, with kids of his own. And have that moment like he had with Bonnie at the end of Toy Story 3, where he kind of explains to his kids how much Buzz meant to him when he was their age, how much Woody meant to them. You know, have that moment of nostalgia, but also keep it in that wonderful Pixar aura of shared experience and empathy and family togetherness. Keep that going, rather than just have the cynical, we made a movie. It's totally Andy's favorite. That's why I got a doll. No. It's like someone decided in like the first draft, hey, what if this was the case? What if this was Andy's favorite movie, but meant it only as a rhetorical question, and no one was allowed to actually answer it with the actual consequences of that idea? This does not hold up to even the slightest scrutiny. If you just leave it as is, it's a great movie. If you tie it back to Toy Story in the future, or just have it be something that an adult Andy shares with his children, it can still work. Making it go back and be Andy's favorite movie, which then explains why he gets a Buzz Lightyear doll, just doesn't really make any sense. And it's almost cynical, because it then makes it about the toys rather than the adventure. Now, you would think that with 4 films called Toy Story, that would be the case with all of them, but it never was. Yes, toys were sold, whether they were original ones like Buzz and Woody or licensed ones like Mr. Potato Head or Barbie. I'm sure sales went up on all of them. But it was all about using them as a framing device to tell a universal story. This is just an attempt to sell toys. And again, one that misfires in that messaging, because you know that Andy would have wanted the cat as well as Buzz and probably the rest of the cast. It just doesn't make sense in that context. And because of that, we have to, in essence, put Lightyear alongside its true spiritual kin, the Cars movies, which again only exists to sell toys. Again, it's not a bad movie. I actually really enjoyed it, but it's a gigantic flaw that stops it from getting up to the B tier, to the A's, and especially to the S's. So there we are. As of July 5th, 2022, 1 year into this channel, here are the Pixar rankings. Cars 2, Monsters University, The Good Dinosaur, Finding Dory, Luca, Cars, Cars 3, Lightyear, Brave, A Bug's Life, Onward, Toy Story 4, Turning Red, Finding Nemo, Toy Story 2, Coco, Monsters Inc., Up, Incredibles 2, Ratatouille, Soul, Toy Story, The Incredibles, Toy Story 3, Inside Out, and WALL-E. That's where my mercurial mind has it for now. I'm sure it'll change again as the years go on. Until next time, once again, thank you all so much for even watching this for 5 seconds. I'm never going to make money off this, and if I do, cool. If not, I'm just having fun, but it really does warm the old cockles of this cynical heart to know that I'm reaching someone and that you guys are engaging with it, whether it's for good or bad. So the more you keep watching, the more I'll keep doing this, and I'm truly grateful. Until next time, keep it locked on the blog, actuallypaid.com, and I'll see you soon. I'm Bill Hammond. I actually paid to see this.